There are a lot of fashion trends that we view with contempt and mockery, and maybe you can recall one from your own life that is immortalized in a picture that you would prefer to forget because it's so odd. One cannot dispute that some of the things individuals did for fashion were really fascinating. Weird fashion trends from history were frequently dangerous as well. Toxic arsenic might be used to create vibrant hues, and large amounts of crayons could readily catch fire. Many of these bizarre fashion trends from the past significantly hampered people's ability to lead normal lives even if the attire wasn't lethal. Wearing bliots made it difficult for people to use their arms. For men wearing crackows, walking was a little difficult, and excessively big panniers hindered ladies from fitting through tight entrances. Welcome back to History Rediscovered. In this episode, we discuss the weird, stomach-churning fashion trends throughout history. 5th and 16th century men sought to accentuate their packages with codpieces. The codpiece as a feature of male dress dates to the 15th and 16th centuries during the Renaissance. Designed to cover the gap between the two legs of men's hose, it is packed and shaped to emphasize rather than disguise the genital area. The origins of the codpiece lie in the triangle of fabric used to join the two separate hose legs in the late 15th century when doublets shortened. Soon padding was added and ended up as the codpiece, a prominent, suggestive shape filling the gap between the legs of the breeches. It soon became a normal part of male clothing, in style across many, countless and social levels until the end of the 1500s. Tailors became as creative with codpiece shapes as with other clothing details. The codpiece could hide a pocket or even be used as a pincushion. With great size comes great decorative responsibility, and men of means rose to the occasion. They brocaded, damasked, bejeweled, embroidered, tasseled, tinseled, and otherwise ornamented their codpieces until they became like walking Christmas trees. Puberty was no prerequisite. Boys as young as 7 could engorge themselves with silk and satin. Codpiece even found its way to warfare. Suit of the king's armor, boasting a bulbous codpiece weighing more than 2.5 pounds, is still on display at the Tower. By the close of the 16th century, the codpiece had become a canker blossom on the male form, and it declined as suddenly as it had ascended. Hobble skirt, I thought was a funny name when I came across it, but when I knew what it was became even funnier. During the first decade of the 1900s, just as women began demanding more freedom, more rights, and more comfortable fashions, one of the most restrictive styles of the 19th and 20th centuries came into vogue. This was the hobble skirt, a tight, ankle-length skirt that grew narrower at the hem. Popular between 1905 and 1910, the hobble skirt was so tight at the ankles that the woman wearing it could only walk in very short steps. The hobble is the latest freak in women's fashions. Skirts are so tight around the ankle that locomotion is seriously impeded and speed is impossible. Read one headline on June 12, 1910. The idea allegedly originated with Paul Poiret, the French designer who claimed in 1908 that he had freed the bust but shackled the legs. The very nature of this skirt limited its marketability, as only women that lived lives of luxury and ease could afford such limited mobility. Yet hobble skirt became the most popular trend of the Edwardian era. I think that women in this era were the most fashionable women in history, and as was common with most preceding aristocratic fashions, appearance trumped functionality. Also, new methods of information dissemination allowed the hobble skirt to become popular despite this flaw. The clean lines and reduced fabric meant it was easy to produce. Bottle green dresses were all the rage in the Victorian era, and they had price tags to match. Arsenic was a wonder product of the Victorian age. It was produced in vast quantities and its deadly effects did nothing to diminish its popularity. Arsenic could be found in just about anything, but its greatest success was in its use in green fabric dyes. Green was a difficult color to produce and keep, until it was discovered that arsenic could create the brightest green dyes that lasted. First found by Swedish chemist Carl Scheele, he used copper arsenite to create a bright green dye that was dubbed Scheele green in 1775. By 1814, a German company used Scheele's discovery to produce a green color so bright it became known as emerald green. The dye was an instant hit and quickly found its way into textiles used in making the most fashionable dresses of the day. At the time, Britain was slowly switching from candle to gas lighting, and the emerald green looked stunning in this new light. New fashion plates were created, showing this new color in all the most up-to-date trends. Green was the it color at parties and balls up and down the country. However, as we know, arsenic is a toxic substance, and it wasn't long before women started reporting shocking symptoms from wearing these green textiles close to the skin. The British Medical Journal wrote that a woman who wears these arsenic green fashions carries in her skirts poison enough to slay the whole of the admirers she may meet with in half a dozen ballrooms. The dye in the fabric caused sores and ulcers to appear on the skin, and sweating increased the release of arsenic from the dye and allowed it to sink into the bloodstream. This caused the hair to fall out, vomiting of blood, and the liver and kidneys to shut down. Despite this, the dye was still in use and still as popular as ever in the late 1800s, with reports of arsenic poisoning appearing in the 1870s. As bad as this exposure was, we can't forget about the poor souls who made these dyes in factories. Life expectancy was short for these workers, and many lost the use of their hands through the constant ulcers due to the arsenic exposure. A 19-year-old artificial flower maker who produced arsenic green flowers for the fashionable dress industry died a violent death after convulsing, foaming from the mouth and vomiting. When she died, her hands were stained green, and so were the whites of her eyes. A post-mortem confirmed death by arsenic poisoning. Many museums across the country still have examples of Victorian dresses that are still emitting arsenic exposure to this day, but the green of these dresses are still as bright as ever. A crackow shoe is a type of shoe that has an unnaturally elongated and pointed toe. Crackow, long, pointed, spiked shoe worn by both men and women, first in the mid-14th century and then condemned by law. Krakow shoes get their name from the city Krakow, Poland, where the shoes are thought to have originated. Krakows were admired on the feet of the courtiers of Anne of Bohemia, who married Richard II of England. The exaggerated toes were imitated even in armor. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as poulaines as well, referring to their Polish origin. Krakow shoes have a peculiar and often silly look, as the toe of the shoe was known to extend anywhere from a couple of inches to over 20 inches in length. Because of who wore them, Krakow shoes gained a reputation of being the shoe reserved for nobility and those who could afford a luxurious, relaxed lifestyle, just like private jets, yachts, and expensive watches are today. Polish nobles set the standard for these shoes to be the footwear for the upper class, and it wasn't long before the fashion trend was imitated by the common folk. The elongated, awkward toes of Krakow shoes were also a sort of status symbol. Those who wore them made an unintended social statement that they had the freedom and luxury to enjoy life and not work. Chains were sometimes strung from the toe of the Krakow to the knee to allow the wearer to walk. Sometimes the toes were stuffed with material for the same reason. They were considered ridiculous, vain, and dangerous by many conservatives and church leaders who called them devil's fingers. Developed in the early 16th century, and especially popular among Venetian women, the high-platformed shoe called the chopine had both a practical and symbolic function. The thick-soled, raised shoe was designed to protect the foot from irregularly paved and wet or muddy streets, but the enhancement of the wearer's stature also played a role. The chopine's height introduced an awkwardness and instability to a woman's walk. The Venetian woman who wore them was generally accompanied by an attendant on whom she would balance. Despite the obvious expense, Venetian sumptuary laws regulating expenditure on luxuries, did not address the issue of exaggerated footwear until it reached dangerous proportions. It was once thought that very high chopines, 20 inches as seen in an example from the Museo Corre in Venice, were the accoutrements of the courtesan and were intended to establish her highly visible public profile. However, 16th century accounts suggest that the chopine's height was associated with the level of nobility and grandeur of the Venetian woman who wore them, rather than with any imputation as to her profession. During the 1770s, there emerged a new type of fashionable fellow, the macaroni, whose style was frequently and easily lampooned by cartoonists and the media. The fashions became so extravagant that they inspired much criticism and caricature. Bright colors, tight clothing, feathers in their hats. In the 1760s, aristocratic British men donned large wigs with a small hat or feather at the top. The young men who took up this fashion trend reportedly brought it back from their grand tour across continental Europe, in which they intended to deepen cultural knowledge. The style is, in fact, named after the Italian pasta dish, signifying sophistication and worldliness. Many British men who visited Italy in this era came home dressed like this and affecting Italian manners which they believed were more cultured. Most British men of the era believed it to be more pretentious, and the style of dress was tied to the new Italian foodstuff. In the popular rhyme, Yankee Doodle, the British would sing, "Yankee Doodle went to town a-riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap, and called it macaroni." The lyrics were meant to satirize the idea that any commoner could stick a feather in his hair and consider himself as valuable as macaroni. Regardless of the rhyme, however, the style became a trend and lived on well into following decade. That's it for today. Remember to support, please subscribe.